video of historic video game weapons, we have the venerable Remington 870 that you see in front of you. Now, this gun is something that has seen action in countless and absolutely countless video games. Pretty much name any modern first-person shooter, and chances are pretty high that you've most likely seen a Remington 870 in there with a whole bunch of different modifications left and right. Now, this is something that's been ongoing since more or less the 90s in video games, since way before then in film. And the really nice part about this gun is that it's just so prolific, it's been in use by the US military for an extremely long time, that pretty much the aftermarket for these guns is just limitless. There are so many options, there's so many ways to do this gun your particular way, that it's almost mind-numbing, honestly, with how many options are actually available to you as the end user when you end up getting yourself one of these. Now, they do come in a lot of different varieties. The 870 does come as a longer hunting shotgun, and you can also take that same hunting shotgun if you happen to have that lying around, and you could turn it into something more or less like this, which is more of a tactical kind of layout, where you do have the top rail sight. You can attach various optics, you can change the foregrip on it, get yourself a side saddle on the side, put a bunch of different optics on the front to different sights. If you decide to go that route, you can also put flashlights, etc. Pretty much the sky is the limit with this particular firearm. Now, why exactly is it so legendary, and what makes it such a really neat gun? And the answer, I think, ultimately comes down to the fact that A, the looks are pretty iconic. It's got that very awesome sort of classic shotgun look where you have the really nice long stock, and then you've got your two, you've got the barrel and then also the shell holder in here, or the magazine, and they all stick out quite prominently within the gun. Now, as this particular version started its life as the Wingmaster model, which is normally used for hunting, it would have had the longer 24-inch barrel, sometimes 20, just depending on the kind of layout. This particular model, in this particular gun, actually has an 18-inch barrel, so it's definitely a lot shorter than something that you would see, again, on the hunting variants. The very interesting part about the 870 is that at one point in its development, there was also a version that actually allowed it to have a little bit less recoil, because they ended up having a system in here that actually used a gas piston, a very interesting design, not one that stayed around for very long. However, it is something that does exist out there, that of course did limit how many shells you could shoot out of the gun, but at the same time, for those folks that are sort of hunting enthusiasts, they were most certainly pretty happy to see that sort of addition to the Remington family, and that's a firearm that's highly sought after today. Now, obviously, one of the sort of biggest differences, and one of the reasons why not too many people like the gun, is actually the safety here. So the safety is something that you have to depress. It is very small. A lot of people like to replace this with a bigger thumb safety so that it's a lot easier to maneuver. At one point, somebody had actually made a rotating AR-style safety for the Remington 870, but I don't think that company is making that particular kind of modification anymore. Now, on the top here, you'll see I have an imitation Vortex razor. I'm still waiting to get my actual razor on this firearm, but now that I've had this guy for a while, I really like the look of it. I think it completes the gun quite nicely, but obviously with something like a shotgun, pretty much any holographic optic will do the trick. So an EOTech would sit pretty nicely on top of here. So would one of the SIG options as well. I don't know too many other manufacturers that make holos, but red dots would work just as fine generally too, just so long as you have a pretty good sight picture coming out of the firearm itself, especially in this more tactical configuration. Whereas if you're actually going to be shooting something along the lines of slugs out of the more hunting-based variant, then you may want the longer barrel and a scope that actually allows for some magnification. That's where a lot more of the ACOGs come in. But that's the other really awesome part about this gun, is that if you do decide to kind of convert it back to more or less a hunting type kind of gun, you can just remove the nut from the front in here, take out the magazine, remove the barrel at that point, and then you can stick on a bigger barrel, put in a different magazine tube, screw it all back together, and for the most part you are good to go within just a couple of minutes. That's really the versatility that this sort of firearm offers. Now, again, as I mentioned before, one of the main reasons it's been in use, again, in video games, in movies, and by various police forces and the US military, is just because of the fact that it is such a versatile firearm. You can turn this thing to shoot almost any kind of ammunition that you could think of, anything from buckshot, slugs. You can shoot salt rounds, you can shoot beanbags out of this guy. If you so decide, even though it's very illegal, you can shoot flashés and dragon breath rounds. Again, those are going to be very dependent on where you are, although I suppose you could make them yourself if you're so inclined. However, again, just the fact that it is able to cycle all of this ammunition is the really big draw to a lot of these sort of, regular pump shotguns versus what you would see in a semi-automatic, where some loads they simply won't take, or a lot of them may actually cause some damage to the gun if fired continuously. With this sort of firearm, that's really not as big of an issue. It's a fairly rugged gun. Now, one of the big sort of downsides that a lot of people say is that it is slow to fire or slow to cycle. And the thing is, that's quite simply not true. If you are able to cycle it really quickly yourself, you can pretty much shoot it as quickly as your body allows while sort of maintaining target. In my particular guise, the shotgun is a lot heavier than it would be from the factory, and that helps absorb a lot more of that recoil. However, if it does come down to it, you can always basically just put the gun as you would as you were holding it like this, and then obviously in my case, because I do not have shells in there, so very fast cycling firearm. Pretty much as fast as your trigger can be pulled, you can keep firing this gun, and as quickly as you can pull back the action. Now, as you can see in here, it is currently empty, but I do recommend for those of you who decide to practice at home to get yourself some snap caps. They allow you to still pull the trigger, basically eject the shells, but at the same time you're not having to worry about actually having live ammunition in the firearm at the time of your training. And the other addition to those is some of them actually come with a bore sight, and so that means you can actually see where roughly the round would be firing if you were to actually get it on target, which again is just really neat. Now, one of the things that I love about this particular 870, the way that I have it set up, is again I do have that top rail that allows me to run various optics on the gun itself. I initially actually had a quad rail that extended a little bit further along out to the front, and that allowed me to run flashlights, etc., various different optics along this side here. So if you wanted to do something like a canted red dot, you could do that on the side here, although obviously it would be a little bit better a little bit further back. I do also have on here a Spitfire Armory sight. Now, this particular one is really here just for cosmetic purposes because I actually don't have the rear aperture on here. It would normally come with a ghost ring sight, but obviously because I do run the full rail, it actually interferes with what would be otherwise basically a ghost ring sight in the rear. Now, as for the stock, this is a standard knock stock. It can be adjusted in or out, so that allows for a little bit more kind of maneuverability with the gun, but also it means that for various types of shooters who might be bigger or smaller, they can again kind of adjust that to their own body and the way that they handle the firearm in general. Now, again, the other part that's really neat about this is that these guns have so many parts available even when you're not talking about aftermarket, that generally speaking, even if you do manage to mess one of these up while you're rebuilding one, or you happen to, end up just breaking something on the gun for whatever reason, getting parts that are available out there is super easy. You can go on eBay, you can go on any of your favorite sort of firearm supply site. Obviously, places like Brownells, Cabela's, Bass Pro Shops will carry a lot of the stuff for this gun as well. And that's the really big bonus, is that you can pretty much go almost anywhere and it's almost guaranteed that they would have exactly the parts that you're looking for. And if not, they can generally order them and be available to you very quickly. Also, a lot of these parts can be sold on Amazon. Some of them are just very basic pieces of the firearm, and again, you can pick them up for fairly cheap. One of the other things that I've done on this particular gun is I've actually replaced the shell carrier latch spring with something that is a little bit stiffer from the police version of the 870. So that means that when I can cycle really quickly and it'll be able to pop up that shell pretty much regardless. Something that wasn't necessarily true on the Wingmaster, which is the model that I have. That one did not have that more aggressive shell. The only real drawback is that it does make it a little bit more difficult to insert shells into this firearm when you do run that heavier spring. But the other really nice part about this guy is that the actual trigger mechanism has been completely polished, so that gives me a light trigger pull. And you can also just go for something like a Timney trigger with these sort of guns, and that'll get you pretty much 99% of the way there, in addition to giving you some adjustments on the trigger pull as well, which is actually really nice. You do want it to be able to crack really cleanly so that you're not having to anticipate the shot for a really long time and therefore flinching. That obviously would cause you quite a bit of grief. For those of you who are curious, the rail on top of this is from Mesa Tactical, and so this comes with a little side saddle, as you can see right here, and that's got shells. You can carry up to 6 shells on that saddle. And then on here in the front, I have a Strike Industries foregrip, as well as the Angle foregrip, or AFG, attached to that to allow me to grip this guy a little bit better. I am somebody who ends up having rather sweaty hands, so being able to grab onto this guy, pretty imperative. And so having something where I have a little bit of a grip towards the back of my hand means that I'm able to move this back and forward and cycle the gun relatively quickly. Now, one thing I should mention is that the actual magazine can be extended out depending on the state that you live in, and it's fairly easy, again, just by removing this piece right here. You can pop this guy out, get a new spring in there, and get a magazine extension, and get yourself a couple of extra rounds. Now, there are also a bunch of various shell carriers that you can get for your, for example, tactical plates, or if you end up carrying any kind of webbing, you can definitely have shell carriers that attach to your webbing. But one of the coolest things that I've seen is actually the quick loaders for these shotguns. I'll try and include some imagery as we go through this so that it makes a little bit more sense. And the main reason those are pretty neat is because you're basically just inserting a whole tube full of, let's say 6. In some cases they go up to, I believe, 8 rounds. So you can get some that are 8 rounds if you have the extended mag, and just slot all of those in, and then you just basically toss the feeder away, and then at that point you've got yourself a fully loaded shotgun, which is a lot faster than doing dual loads or quad loads. It doesn't really matter. It would be a lot faster than even using your side saddle, and even if you've got one of those sort of extra shells that are just right here in case you need to drop one into the chamber really quick in an emergency. Again, those fast loaders are just the way to go, because you just slot them in, the excess flies out, and then you've got yourself the full gamut of shells pretty much immediately. If you've been watching somebody like Jerry McCulloch, you'll probably see that he has shot those a bunch of times with that particular kind of attachment, and they do an extremely good job. Now, of course, something that needs to be said is that these are incredibly dangerous if not handled correctly. So generally speaking, if you are going to be practicing, do try to practice without live ammunition. Obviously that should go without saying, but as it goes, try to avoid basically slotting in any actual live shells when you're just messing around with your gun. So with that said, I'll try and continue this series, and I'll try and drop more and more videos of these guns in action as we kind of continue forward with this, and ultimately I'll eventually do some more videos at the range, as these firearms are all incredibly fun in their own way. Hopefully the next one that I'll be doing will be the Beretta M92 or some variant thereof, and that'll be of course in the pistol series at that point. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Until next time, it's been Crazy Walter.